Hi there, and welcome to the Cotswold Explorer. I'm Robin Shuckburgh, and we are exploring the beautiful region of the Cotswolds in southwest England, following in the trail of Herbert Evans, who cycled around this region and wrote about his experiences in this wonderful book, The Highways and Byways in Oxford and the Cotswolds, published in 1905, 114 years ago. Today you find Ross and me and Widget in Steeple Aston, just a few miles north of Oxford, on the way to Banbury. It's a beautiful little village, this, in the folds of the hills, the Cherwell Valley running down to our left here, where the canal and the railway run also. It's called Steeple Aston, and yet the church is one of the few in the region with no steeple at all. It's slightly difficult to know why that is, but my guess is that probably it stems from the word staple, which in those days meant market, and I suspect there was a market here. There is no longer. It's a pretty place. It's on the way to the selection of villages around Banbury, which we will be filming in the near future. Meanwhile, there's an interesting story about the inside of this church. Follow me and I'll show you. Inside this lovely church is a memorial to a notorious hanging judge who died in 1741. His name was Sir Francis Page, and Evans writes of this monument: "It was erected by the judge in his lifetime to perpetuate the memory of himself and his wife." It says much for the complacence of the rector and church wardens of the day that he was allowed to destroy existing monuments to make room for it. Events proved that he was wise in erecting this monument, for on the death of his bachelor nephew and heir, his estate passed into other hands and the judge's mansion was destroyed. This church is the proud owner of a 14th century cope, an embroidered semicircular cloak to be worn by an important cleric during the frequent great processions that took place then. It's an extremely rare survivor, and since the 1890s it has lived most of its time in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, making occasional appearances in Steeple Aston for fundraising purposes. Outside the door of the church we find what looks very much to me like another of those unusual crosses we discovered by the church in Yarnton, which marked the stopping points for medieval pilgrims during their aforementioned processions. I remember saying at the time that we were likely to find more of these on our travels. Like most of the villages in this region, there are signs of Iron Age settlement here in Steeple Aston, and considerable evidence of Roman and Saxon activity. Of course, it was mentioned in William the Conqueror's Doomsday Book in 1086, and it was at the forefront of educational revolution, building its first school in 1640. In the 20th century, many new houses were built here, and it had become one of the most sought-after villages to live in. Iris Murdoch and her husband John Bailey lived here at Cedar Lodge for 30 years, and in that century its neighbour, the Upper Hayford US Air Force Base, brought many American residents to the village, who played a great part in the community. The base is now closed, and the quiet skies go some way towards making up for the loss of the much-enjoyed visitors from the States. Just a couple of miles north of Steeple Aston is the village of Deddington. The first and most extraordinary thing you notice about Deddington is its colour. You get the impression you're suddenly in a golden world, where the buildings glow in the sunshine, unlike anything you've ever seen before. The reason is soon apparent. The stone from which these houses are built comes from quarries nearby, which are so rich in minerals that they're unique in the region. Evans, over 100 years ago, writes of Deddington: "Time was when Deddington must have been a paradise for a painter. But times have changed. Like so many other ancient settlements in this district, Deddington is a decayed market town." These days we'd question his analysis, of course, but what he saw at the time was the beautiful ancient golden buildings surrounded by Victorian red brick and slate houses, seen by him as a nasty modern intrusion into the local vernacular. We're at last able to use our beloved drone, as we're outside any restricted area, and we're flying off the ancient castle site. The church in Deddington has extraordinarily wide nave and aisles, while the chancel is particularly narrow, but its overall impression is of wonderful spaciousness and light. The steps in the jambs of the windows, both north and south, look incongruous, but they were once the steps to the galleries in rude screens, ornate divisions enclosing chapels at the end of both aisles. This church is not by any means the most spectacular in the region, but it's certainly one of the most spiritual and restful. Going north, we pass through Adderbury, another lovely village built from the local golden stone. Its church is one of the finest in the region, with a wonderful spire, but hidden somewhat by the builders who were working here when we visited. Its interior is less vandalised than some, but evidence of murals on the walls shows how much plaster and decoration was removed during the Reformation. But a visit to the interior provides a fascinating tale. The tablet on my right on the ground here is in memory of a man called William Olds. He was a vicar here during the Civil War. He was a staunch royalist, so much so that he was a wanted man by the parliamentarians, to the extent that he had to leave his home and take refuge in Banbury, which was at that time a royalist stronghold, until the day when his son was due to go to Winchester, to college for the first time. And he wrote a message to his wife saying that he would like to ride with them for a while to see his son off to his education. Unfortunately, one of the local residents here intercepted the message, discovered that he was going to be there. So when they started their journey, they'd only got about a mile outside the village when they saw in the distance some soldiers. Olds told his wife and son to go on ahead, and as they passed them, if they turned out to be royalist friends, that they should wave and he would come and join them. Unfortunately, when they got there, they made no sign at all. So the vicar turned his horse round and galloped as fast as he could, back towards Banbury and refuge. The soldiers saw him leave and gave chase. The vicar was clever. On the way, he threw his money, such as he had, onto the road behind him. And all the soldiers but one were tempted by this to stop and pick up the money, except one, who followed him at full gallop towards Adderbury. As he came into the village, fully intent on riding straight through for Banbury, his horse, recognizing his home, decided that under no circumstances would he go any further, however much he was spurred or whipped, which gave the soldier time to catch him up, and he shot him on the spot, dead. A tragic end to a man who was clearly a lovely family man. There is some embroidery to this story from the local villagers. It is said that the man who betrayed him fell dead only a matter of a couple of weeks later on the very spot on which Reverend Olds was shot. I have a suspicion that if there's any truth to that story, someone must have helped him on his way. Next week, we're heading north of here, skirting Banbury and visiting Bloxham and Broughton with its wonderful castle. We'll see you there.